Welcome to this episode of the Bearded Nerd Podcast. Peter, Miroki, how are you today?
Good.
Yeah, doing well. Thanks for having us.
I am so excited to have y'all on. It is really a pleasure. Now, for a lot of my audience members who are GMs and just enthusiasts of TTRPGs, but I think mostly storytelling, I want to ask y'all just right off the bat, how did both of you get into this hobby?
Oh boy. I feel like Peter will have a much more eloquent answer, so I'm gonna hand the floor to Peter first.
Yeah, because Miroki comes more from like a theater background, so I think a lot of your like experience with role play and stepping into character came from that side. Whereas I was very much like a um I think in grade three, I remember there was something that me and my friends called the dice game. And I think it was just we had a six-sided die. We would roll it across the playground. And like we would like we were bowling, like we would roll it really hard and chase it down. And we were playing basically a very simple version of D&D that we were, I think, cobbling together from having like heard of it. Like I don't know why we weren't just playing D&D instead we were making up a game, but it was this like role-playing game that involved rolling dice and doing attacks and making up spells and making up stories. And like as hyperactive third graders, we would be just running around the schoolyard doing this, chasing dice. And then I remember, I think it was in like grade five that at like a rummage sale or like a garage sale, I found like the old 1970s starter D&D sets, just for
Oh
like
my God.
$2 each.
Wow.
They were like beaten up, but it was like, yeah, and then an AD&D book as well. And I'm like, oh, there's like a like I think I'd heard of it at the Dragon, so I'm like, oh, there like is a proper rules and a proper way to play this. So I started playing really old D&D with like Thaco and stuff like that. But again, trying to figure this out when I didn't have someone to teach me and I wasn't uh, making a ton of sense out of it. And then I finally got hooked on third edition, like one of the starter boxes of third edition. And then
Oh,
from there, it
nice.
was like, yeah, I played D&D all through high school. In university, I started like a 3 campus gaming society with like a living style campaign where we would have multiple DMs telling stories in this world that we'd created. Um, and I've been pretty much addicted to the hobby ever since.
So the
So
weirdest thing is that I just started reading this book about the business history of D&D, like the rise and fall of like the whole business side and Gary Gygax. And literally just started, and so I just learned of this like OG version of D&D and AD&D, and apparently Peter, that set was sold for $10 in the 70s, which was worth 55 or $56 in 2022 terms. So you got a steal
yeah, you
buying it
definitely
for
did.
$2. Uh, and it's funny, I only recently have been reflecting about my relationship with TTRPGs, which is just something that unfortunately I really just don't have time to partake in anymore. I would say I was always that player that wanted to play D&D and got as far as designing and drawing characters when I was in high school, but never actually managed to ever sit through a table or a session because my life was just simply too busy. Even as a 14-year-old, I was the kid that was just filled with extracurricular activities.
For
I
sure.
definitely, was the super hardcore Asian student with the tiger parents. So who I didn't really have time or wasn't allowed to be engaging in hours and hours of role play. However, I did realize I spent some time in doing RPGs because when I was like a preteen, 12, 13, I was part of Yahoo groups, and everyone had these Yahoo groups that they like created to do our like role playing in. And all you did was make a post, you play, everyone agreed on a character. Oftentimes it was based on an existing fandom. It was rarely original. At the time for me, it was Gundam Wing
Ooh.
with a small dose of X-Men. And we would just role play as characters inside of it in this very, very kind of like low tech way. So I would say that that's probably been my sphere. But,
And
I
it's all
think
text
similar.
based too, correct?
Yeah, it was all text-based. I
Yeah.
don't think anyone could even like paste an image back then into these posts. So, but I think like similar to Peter, I think, a lot of us, probably engage in some way or shape or form from our youth, whether it's playing house or playing wizards on the playground. And it's just us finding a way to kind of create a more sophisticated version of that as adults.
Absolutely. And for those in the audience that may not know these Yahoo groups, it is quite literally text-based RPGs. It is the quintessential, I'm going to type up this character, or I'm going to type up rather the dialogue that we're having. And nowadays most of my audience may still continue this via Discord. I actually run a text-based RPG and I love it. It's phenomenal. It's still the quintessential storytelling elements that I think every human from the dawn of existence, right? We were around a campfire or we were around food. As we were talking earlier about your food and wine podcast, where that is so quintessential to being a human, where we tell stories around food and drink and have this fellowship. And I think that's one of the reasons why storytelling games like D&D is so important to the human relation, right? And from that being said, what was it like? Take me through, if y'all don't mind, please take me through the process of when you got into these characters. Like, did you mentioned that you had, different IPs that you were playing in, whether it was Gundam or X-Wing, I mean, X-Men, excuse me. Um, when you're in these characters, like what were you thinking? Were you just kind of like making pretend, or were you really wanting to like do some interesting things within your RPG? Because right, there's a lot of political intrigue games that folks like to play, and there's people that like to just hack and slash. Kind of what was your thought process when you were playing these games? What camp were you in, so to speak?
Oh, you're asking 12-year-old me to come up with an answer for this? I would probably say I was a bit of a hack and slash. I mean, I think different groups have different priorities.
Sure.
And I think that's why we engaged in different groups, because some groups might have more original characters, might play in alternate universes. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's some that are extremely pure and want to stay within the parameters of what the canon is.
For sure.
So I would say it very much just probably depended on what tickled your fancy. And I think we as human beings have various ways of wanting to tickle our fancy. So the beauty of having different groups meant that we were allowed to kind of engage in it the way we wanted. And I think it also depended on whether you chose to play an existing character or
Mm-hmm.
whether you wanted to create something new. And I think that probably guides where like how you want to approach RPGs, and perhaps that's sort of where Dungeons and Dragons scratches a different itch than
For
playing
sure.
within a fandom, because Dungeons and Dragons you are creating characters of your own.
Yeah.
And it's
I
really
would.
letting you have a chance to let that creativity
I
come forward.
I will say I made a lot of D&D characters that were very thinly disguised versions of IP characters. From like, this is my original character who just happens to be a lot like Bard from The Hobbit, or just happens to be a lot like, I don't know, Raistlin from Dragonlance. I did a lot
Yeah.
of poorly disguising my IP theft.
No, that, and some of the first characters that I think we all, and the reason I asked that original question was because I was the 12-year-old who was really interested in running political intrigue style games and like having that kind of court, playing the court game, right? If we are role playing as the kings and queens and the nobles and things like that, I loved that because I feel like I'm more of a world builder than I am a game master. That's what I consider myself. I think, for example, Matt Mercer, he is more of a storyteller than he is a game master, and Matt Colville is more of a game designer than a game master. And that's kind of where I'm a little bit odd. I was that odd 12-year-old where when my friends wanted to just like throw dice at each other, quite literally and figuratively, I was the one saying, "Well, wait a minute, what is the emissary of this specific, fantasy country? What are they saying? What are they thinking?" And my friends just looked at me like I was even more of a weirdo. So that's where the question comes from. But I do think you're right when it comes to the different aspects of tabletop games, and specifically with D&D, where you're able to basically do whatever you want and there's this open world to it. um, but from there, a thought process of creating that character comes into mind. But we can. I'm going to ask that later because this next question that I really have, and that I've been actually sourced from a couple of our friends in some of our friends in Discord who found out that we were going to sit down together, and it was about world building. So the question that they had was from a world building perspective, like did if you all have this experience or not, what is it like when you sit down to play a game, play a character, or to GM run a session? Take us through the process of your world building. Is it as simple as just saying, I'm going to put these players in a town, or I'm going to do this simple little, mission or quest? Or do you kind of like think big picture and say, okay, before I even have my first session, I need to have all this information? So, and actually, Peter, I'd love to ask you this question because not to pick on you, but I haven't asked you a question yet. So I definitely want to ask really quick.
Yeah, so I have kind of two answers to this. Traditionally, what I used to do is I like to sketch out the whole world. So I didn't want to just sort of start with the town because the town only makes sense in this larger context of the world. So I would start with the world and I would try to figure out what is the interesting thing about it that will make any area of this world feel consistent. So this can be as simple as like it's a very steampunky world, and then that will be like anywhere in this world there's going to be a bit of that aesthetic, or it could be that like the big uber conflict is a particular there's this big overarching conflict between two nations, and like war is kind of the theme of the world, and that's what will make any area of it feel consistent. So I like increasingly I use Deck of Worlds, which is our world building deck when I am doing world building. Like I like to be able to build out kind of a few different locations, and I always think of it as stocking the cupboard. So like world building is not a story, but it gives you a lot of ingredients to be able to cook a story with, so to speak. And you also want to figure out what story your players will be interested in, what world aspects your players will be interested in. So I like to start off with like throwing a lot of things on the table. Prompts are like one helpful way to do this because you can build out kind of a bunch of different things to use. And stock the cupboard and then see like, okay, well, what's interesting here? Or like based on what my players have told me about what they're interested in for the game, what would work well? So that's kind of what I used to do. Increasingly, I'm actually doing the world building with my players.
Oh, awesome.
And I really, really, really cannot recommend this enough. So what we did first was have everybody, there's a like folk tale about stone soup or button soup, where someone comes to town, puts a big cauldron in the middle of town, puts a button in it, and people are like, what are you doing? Like, oh, I'm making button soup. And kind of everyone in the town starts to bring an extra ingredient to add to the pot, and eventually you end up with like this great soup with all these ingredients. I think that's a really great sort of metaphor for imaginative storytelling and for collaborative world building, where you kind of get everyone to bring their own ingredient. So I start off by asking everyone to talk about like one aspect of a world that they recently experienced, whether they were watching a movie or a show or playing a tabletop RPG that they really connected with or enjoyed. And we write this down on a piece of paper, we put it in the middle. And then I asked for the same thing for a story that you really enjoyed, that whether it's like an element as specific as like, I liked that this story had really complicated relationships between the characters, or I liked that the story felt really heroic and like the heroes were struggling against big odds. So you get those ingredients down. And then you just look for opportunities to use those ingredients in your world building. And again, Deck of Worlds is a really fun tool for doing collaborative world building because everyone can draw cards together, everyone can kind of discuss and add, and you can always go back to those original ingredients that you've written down to like answer questions that might come up in the world building process. So, if somebody really liked world building where there's like secret magic and cults, and you find yourself needing to come up with like a faction or an antagonist, oh great, we have a chance to like bring in the cults and that's our antagonist. So I think it's a really fun way to like get everybody involved and to structure a conversation for world building where everyone can have their ideas, but there's still a bit of structure to it. So you end up with something that feels like a satisfying place to go exploring. And I can tell you from experience that like when players get to go into a setting that they created or that they named, or where their character's from, their ownership and excitement to explore that space or even to tell other players about it in character, it's like I have not seen that level of investment otherwise in D&D. Like it really, really got people into it and excited about it.
Yeah, Peter cares about it so much. It's literally in the guidebook of Deck of Worlds where there's actually a whole section that talks about collaborative world building, how you can use the deck to build prompts together and discuss ideas. I think he had one that was called competitive world building as well. but it ended up when I was reading it, it sounded more collaborative than competitive anyways,
Sure. Yeah.
which probably highlights Peter's desire to like build worlds together as opposed to making them, making yourself compare and make yourself like say one is better than the other because obviously everything that someone creates has merit in some way.
I love that notion too. I Collaborative world building and collaborative storytelling is the reason we're here, right? This is the game that is all about collaboration. There's no necessary winning, as we've talked about, and as a lot of us in the hobby understand. You don't necessarily win in D&D. Telling a story is the actual, prize, so to speak, and being able to tell it together. So I love the fact that you have this product that, really fosters that. But speaking about Deck of Worlds, talk to me about how this idea came up, and then how you two kind of met, and then really just tell me the story about Deck of Worlds. How did it start, and kind of where is it going?
We probably have
Yeah.
to rewind it even further back to how Peter and I met, but we can maybe start from the beginning very quickly and lead into how Deck of Worlds came to be because Deck of Worlds was actually our second deck.
Oh, cool.
Story Engine deck was our first deck, and I will say like that was a Peter project, so I really want to make sure that he gets a chance to tell that story.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, so Story Engine Deck was a project that I launched on Kickstarter in 2019 that I've been working on for some time before that. Um, and originally I started developing it as a way of kind of coming up with your own story prompts, writing prompts. And more on the writing side. I was doing a weekly microfiction project called The Shortest Story, where I do like a postcard sized short story every week. And this would help me come up with ideas, and it was a really fun way to kind of explore quickly like what is the basic structure of a story that if you boiled it down, every story kind of hits these notes or shapes. And I realized really quickly that this deck that would let you build your own story ideas would be a really fun tool for dungeon mastering, and I started using it for dungeon mastering. And I think that like there's a very special skill that DMs and role players develop that sometimes writers actually miss out on, which is kind of that improv instinct of being able to think on your feet and seeing elements of story as mutable. So you suddenly realize you need to come up with an NPC to fit a certain role. I feel like DMs have that instinct to think about like, well, which what kind of character should it be? What kind of class might they be? What would their personality or voice be like? Like they have a bit more of that sense of play that I thought writers could benefit from. And so I realized that the deck would really quickly click with dungeon masters because they would understand like, oh right, I can like adjust the creative choices that I'm making as I build a character or I build a campaign idea or I build a plot hook, and really see the value in being able to tinker and experiment. So that took off in a big way. The deck kind of grew on Kickstarter to the point that I'm like, this is about as much. If this gets any bigger, I won't know how to deliver it. So we're gonna. This is a I'm kind of hitting my limit here. And it was actually a suggestion in the Kickstarter comments to try doing a world building deck. Again,
Cool.
on the spirit of collaboration, like listening to people in your community for ideas and what they're interested in is a really good way to find good ideas that meet
Absolutely.
people's needs, that hit them where they're excited. So I started working on that next. And Deck of Worlds I actually developed during quarantine, which was nice because there's a lot of like not being able to leave your house and being confined to a small space. And so it was really wonderful to be able to like imagine these vast worlds and landscapes and explore them and kind of get out and away from a lot of the anxieties of living during the peak of the pandemic. So Deck of Worlds was a project that I worked on for that. And then when that launched on Kickstarter, and I want to say 2021, it went to like $800,000. And it was definitely like, I no longer know how to deliver something on this scale without bringing in some other people to help.
Yeah.
And Miroki and I had been friends and connected through kind of the Toronto arts and music scene for a while. And when I was sort of just sort of posting a question on Facebook, kind of to the universe about like different like basic resources for like how to grow this project and keep up with it. She'd gotten in touch about like, hey, like I'm an MBA, I understand the creative side, but I also work as a consultant. And then she came on board at first to consult, and then eventually to take over as like basically running the company, all of our operations, logistics, all of that. So I could focus on the creative side, and we've been doing that together full time for a couple of years, but like working on and off part time since 2001. Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome. So there's a lot of history between you two, not only from like the logistical and the operational side, but also the creative side. Because what I'm assuming with having a partner, like both of you are understanding each other in this sense, but also the beauty of it is not like, you weren't just a consultant. You were a consultant that knew a little bit about this creative side and knew not even a little bit, but really were immersed in it when we were talking about the text-based RPGs that you were a part of. Like you knew what an RPG is. You played in it. You've like for me at least, I consider that you were actively playing in a campaign or in a dialogue or I forget what some of the other systems what they call it, but basically a campaign. So you knew that side and you were able to bring that. And I find it so important in this hobby because there's a lot of creatives in this audience right now, but they don't have a business minded side. So actually, Miroki, what I would ask you is for those audience members as a kind of a side tangent who are creative, but they don't know what to look for. They have a project that they want to launch on Kickstarter, but they don't have that business minded or they're not business minded. Do you mind giving some of my audience members a quick rundown in a very simple way of what they should do to pursue that if they have that idea, but they don't know how to take it to market?
Yeah, I mean, and here's the other thing is like I was an artist first. I actually spent 10
Oh,
years as a
cool.
professional actor and producer before I moved into the business realm.
Oh, that's
And I
awesome.
actually and then I'm from Kitchener-Waterloo, so for those who are in Canada, that is the or even in the States, that's the home of BlackBerry.
Oh, cool.
Just because most people have no idea where that city is otherwise. It's close to Toronto. And I actually founded an arts festival there that was dedicated to putting the spotlight on alternative arts and cultures, so comic arts, science
Oh,
fiction,
that's
fantasy,
awesome.
a lot of, arts back then that was not really considered in the realm of fine art in the traditional arts world, and trying to just showcase and highlight the fact that they are indeed artists and creators and deserve the
100%.
same prestige as everyone else. Obviously, in the last decade, games and comics have really, really taken off, and that's a
Yeah,
wonderful thing. But at the time, I founded this festival to try and give a platform to that industry. And
that's awesome.
I think the thing is that when we're creatives, and the thing was is that I've always been an arts and business based person. So, even though I spent 10 years as an actor and a producer, I had a lot of business savvy, maybe partially because of what my father instilled into me, partially through my education. But the biggest thing is like a lot of people don't love thinking about business because perhaps in their minds it's not sexy, I guess, so
Yeah.
to say. But it's creativity in its own way. And the thing is, business is about human relationships. And if we think about the world of games and the world of arts, that's human relationships too. It's not all just numbers. You can't just say to someone, "Oh, well, like just buy my game, it costs this much money," because people don't care about that. Like people don't care. Like people are price sensitive to a certain amount, but the rest of it is, do they care about you as a human being? Do they care about you as a creator? Do they care about the creativity of your games? Can you share that story? So business is actually just storytelling in a different respect. It's how do you tell your story so that someone feels connected to you and wants to play your game and wants to play your product, and just thinking about it from a different lens. And I think sometimes what we fail to do as artists is that we sometimes fail to honor and listen to what our community and customers want from us. We just say, "Oh, well, you don't like our game? Well, screw you. My art is perfect. You don't love
Yeah.
my art." And it's like one of the things that we study a lot in theater is how what does our how does our audience respond to us? Because we do
Mm,
have to please our audience. If we are just creating something
100%.
on stage and we create theater and we don't care what the audience thinks because they don't, and we say that they are beneath us if they don't respect art, that's just narcissism. Like
Yeah, for
that,
sure.
right? Like everything about being creative is a relationship that we develop with our audience. So I think that as creatives, if you put your work out there, I always say ask yourself the question, are you actually ready to hear feedback? Or you just want someone to say, did you do a good job? Right? Because in order to truly get better and improve, you have to hear that feedback. And that includes launching a thing like a Kickstarter. If you launched it and you don't get people wanting to buy in, you have to ask yourself the question, why did why did my work not resonate with people? Maybe it is a matter of maybe you didn't launch, maybe you gave yourself not enough of lead time. There's obviously logistical elements to it, but sometimes at the core is, did I communicate it effectively? Now, on the logistics standpoint, I mean, I could probably write a course about things like this, but I always say like you can never plan early enough. I think one of the things that we often fall into a hole of when people want to launch a project is that they never give themselves enough lead time. You're putting together your campaigns a week in advance. That is not enough time. Like the campaign, a crowdfunding campaign doesn't start on day one of you launching the Kickstarter. It starts weeks and months in advance because you need to have a concept. You need to have graphics. You need to have content. You need to have marketing. You want people to be ready to jump on your project in day one. If you're only starting to share your project on day one, it's over because you're going to be fighting an uphill battle for the next 30 days. So I always say to people like planning is your friend, and you'll get better every single time. The first year I ran my festival, I can tell you the amount of times I ran around with like a chicken with my head cut off.
Hmm.
Then you get better every time. Take notes, record everything you do so that you can use it to better yourself next time. And budgets are your friend. I won't get into that hullabaloo because there's all, like I said, is a thing and finance is a thing. But dude, create a budget at minimum and break down as many line items as you can. And there are so many resources online. Like literally, Google is your friend, folks. Look up budget templates. There are so many ways you can help yourself for free or for very cheap.
Absolutely. But budgeting, even in the I mean, budgeting is always a good thing, whether you are at the game store and you're telling yourself, I don't need these minis, but I'm going to buy them anyway. You should probably set a budget. And I'm speaking to myself because I know my wife probably listens to this and she's going to listen to this part. So, honey, I do budget. But with that being said, I know a lot of my audience as well. We're game masters and players and players who want to game master that really want to build really epic and cool worlds. So with the story engine deck and with the deck of worlds, if you can kind of explain to me and explain to us, how does it work? Like, what is it that how do we construct it from these decks a really cool world? Do you mind taking us through that process?
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about how the system works. So, Deck of Worlds has 6 card types that kind of help facilitate the world building process. And you build one, we call them micro settings at a time. So, this is like one independent
Ooh.
location. You can transport locations between worlds or combine them to make a bigger world or world map. And these are kind of the basic building blocks. So, you'll draw a region card to help establish what the main terrain type or the dominant region is. So, you might end up with like a swamp. You'll draw a landmark card to add a point of interest to that location. So and you'll have choices on these cards. You can choose between different options. So for the landmark, you might be choosing between a tower and a grove. So you'll
Ooh.
think about these options, which one's more interesting. You'll tuck the card underneath the region so you only see the option that you're using. So any text that you're deciding to ignore goes away. But if you change your mind later, you just rotate the card or pull it back out, and you can change which option you're using. So it's nice and modular because you can kind of audition an idea or try out an idea and see how it feels, and then keep going. The next card is the namesake card. This is kind of my favorite card type in the deck. It's little fragments of nicknames that you will combine with either the region or the landmark to give it like a really lore-based or lore-rich nickname. It doesn't have to be the literal name by which it's labeled on the map. It could just be like a name by which some people call it, but it's you start to instantly feel like the Flint and Tinder striking of the story brain trying to explain why that name come up. So you might end up with like the swamp where no bird sings. That's the nickname. And you're like, well, why are no birds singing there? That's an interesting name. And again, the story brain wakes up and starts to come up with answers because, like you said, we're storytelling creatures. And also we're creatures who don't like not knowing things. So we will start to
Absolutely.
make up stories and theories almost involuntarily.
I
So
love
yeah, you
that
might end up with
nickname,
that.
by the way. I love that
Thank you. Yeah.
nickname.
That was
I,
the one from the demo in the guidebook. It's one of the ones I played around with and got, and I got really excited about it. So I decided to use that for the demo guidebook. But like likewise, that same card would have other prompts you could combine with like the tower or the grove, and you might end up with like the Golden Grove or the tower at Land's End, something like that. And again, these are meant to provoke the question of like, why is it called that? What does it mean? So we're 3 cards deep now. We've got a swamp, we've got a tower, we've got some mysteries as to how the names came about. Next, we would draw an origin card, and an origin card is kind of an establishing point in the past of the location, either something that started here, originated here, or a detail about how it was founded, um, or what it was like in the past. To that, you'd add an attribute card, which would give you a present day detail about the location or about the people who live there. So maybe they're known for distinctive architecture. Maybe that location is just like there's frequently earthquakes and tectonic aberrations. Maybe there's an unexplained sound that people hear there and no one's ever figured out what it is. Just little prompts that, again, sometimes we'll get the story brain waking up. And then the last card type, which I didn't lie when I said namesakes are my favorite. It's just like tied for my favorite is the advent cards. Advents are coming changes to the location. So these are
Oh,
things that could
cool.
happen soon. And these are great story starters. So it might be that like an unrecognized faction is starting to set up without permission and no one knows why. It could be that like a political issue is dividing the populace and there's about to be a debate on it. This for especially for dungeon masters, this is like a great place to look at what's my story hook to get the players involved.
That's what
And it's
I was
usually
exactly going to say, that that would be a great place to put story hooks to get the players there, which then what we spoke about earlier, right, where we tied in those backstories with the with collaborative world building, you can weave that into a player's backstory of saying, hey, the tower at Land's End, right? Well, this is in the region where the dwarf paladin's from. So the political changes that are really occurring, it's gonna affect that paladin in some form or fashion. It may change their oath, right? Let's say they're the oath of the crown for, I don't know, that might change their allegiance. And then do they have power still? I don't know. But like you mentioned, we're curious creatures. So we're going to follow that. And it just, that's beautiful. Sorry, I got really excited about that because I really love tools that assist in the 5 W's of world building, right? Like the who, what, where, when, why. When we're able to ask those questions as world builders and game masters, and as players too, like it makes for a better story at the end of the day. So I really love that. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I got
no.
really excited
I
about it.
what I'll say is like we record a lot of like both live streams and then occasionally like recorded YouTube videos where we are pulling prompts. And something that I've noticed is that we start to get naturally very excited. Like people, the pot starts to bubble, and like that. My favorite thing is, and this is something that I have to cut out when I edit my recorded videos, is me going like, oh, or like, oh, like there'll be so many reactions that I'm like, this is too, and it's just what happens when again when the story brain wakes up when you start to see possibilities. So I love that excitement. It's something that we feel when we're doing it. It's something that I've just been paying attention to more as I've been sort of thinking back about the videos that I try and edit, especially if I have to edit something down to like 60 seconds of reel or shorts time. You cut out the ums, you cut out the uhs, and I have to cut out a lot of the oohs and ahs as well. But yeah,
I
it's a
think
lot
it,
of fun.
yeah. I mean, that's the thing is like, even though we're the ones who are playing with the deck all the time, obviously it's our decks, we're demoing them regularly. There's so many like the core story engine deck. So like deck, maybe I'll refer to Deck of Worlds first because that's what Peter described. But Deck of Worlds has like 900 billion possible combinations and just the core deck. And
Yeah.
we have 9 expansions for that. And then Story Engine deck is 30 billion combinations. So it's pretty much endless, right? So
Yes.
even though we demo the deck all the time, we can constantly change it. And where there's always going to be something new. And it's very fascinating because when we do the live streams, we invite our audience to vote along. So we'll
Ooh.
offer them the couple of options. We'll say like, do you want it, we're going to build a character. We're going to build an NPC with story engine deck. Do you want it to be like a writer or survivor or a militant, and then like they have or a witch, and then we have to have them vote, and then we'll give them like we'll give them the engine. It's like they either want to expose the secret or they want to keep the secret. And so everyone starts pitching now, right? Because now you're seeing these people go down these different pathways and they're saying, well, I think they should expose the secret because XYZ. I think they should keep the secret because XYZ, right? And then we give them the next thing. We'll say like, well, they want to expose the secret of a paradise. So that's the third card in Story Engine deck. And then they keep bubbling new ideas because you keep feeding them a new thing. So it
Yeah.
starts with one thing and they'll have this thought, and then you're like, but what about this now? What about this information? What about this information? And then they can all like come together and come up with different stories or similar, even if someone votes for the same thing. So let's say if someone said like, so I'm just reading a prompt that exists
Yeah.
on our website for Story Engine, which uses our agent card, engine card, object card, and conflict card, then with an aspect. So we have 5 cards for Story Engine. So the story would be a survivor wants to expose the secret of a corrupted paradise, but their community will reject them. There are so many different stories that depending which kind of, storyteller you are, you can go in this direction or this direction. One idea, even just one prompt can generate so many ideas. And Story Engine and Deck of Worlds, as you can tell, because Story Engine uses kind of like a character-based prompting system and world build, and then Deck of Worlds is micro settings, you could combine those two together,
Absolutely.
right? Like the swamp, maybe the swamp is the corrupted paradise. And it's weird because you don't necessarily think of a swamp as a paradise, but it could like swamps could also be oases, right? Like you can kind of
Absolutely.
imagine like it's teeming with life, but it's corrupted and maybe that's why it's swamp. Like there's so many opportunities that you can delve into it. Or if that one doesn't fit, maybe it's another micro setting. And
Yeah.
like that micro setting is now tied into this thing, but this micro setting is maybe like the place that character's going to journey to.
Well, and something that you mentioned, like let's use the example of the swamp. A swamp can be a paradise in a desert, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you think about it, yes, there are different biomes, but technically, if we're pontificating about this topic, we can take this from a different perspective and go from there. And I love the fact that both these decks have a player component and a GM component that combined together fits with the collaborative world building philosophy. And you can really kind of, excuse me, mesh this together in a beautiful way. You can, I can already envision this like as a player, I could get that deck and I can say, okay, I'm going to create a character. But where am I from? Oh, wait a minute. Let me use this and then I can build my region, where I'm from, what's a landmark, and then have all this information. And that's my character's backstory. I don't have to sit here and write with a pen or paper, even though I do specifically and personally have a character journal. I'm very proud of it. but um, but my character journal now can have all this information from this deck, which then is given to my GM. And I can say, hey, GM, take this and run with it. And then the GM can take it, run with it, and build something else, right? Like I love, and realistically, I love tools, right? I don't want to even say it's a product, although we all know that everything can be a product, but like this is a tool, and it's such a good tool to have in a toolkit. I love it, and I'm really happy and excited because I have my deck, and I'm gonna let my players kind of just run with it. I want to see what they build as well, and I've been really excited because we do meet. We're all married with kids, so it's kind of hard to meet when we
Yeah.
have little ones. But when we do meet, we do have a great time. So it's definitely something I'm going to share with my players. But if you don't mind, we spoke about the kind of the world building and the the player building and almost, or rather the player capabilities and the GM capabilities. You mentioned about writers. I do have a couple of authors in my audience. What could, if you don't mind, kind of expressing or showcasing how a writer could use these decks?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it started off as a writing tool that I realized just was it's a good multi-tool. Like you can use it in a lot of different ways.
100%.
So for writers, there's a few ways that I recommend using it. The definitely like if you have writer's block, if you're like I don't know what to write, it's a great way to get unstuck. So because you are drawing one card at a time, you're making these smaller creative decisions, and again, you start to wake up your writer brain, your storyteller brain without waking up the editor or the critic that often creates writer's block, that shuts things down. That's like, well, that idea isn't good enough, because you
Yeah.
become curious about your own prompt. You become curious about finding the answers to what connects these cards. And the thing that I've found time and time again is when I felt locked up, and I draw prompts, sometimes not even with the goal of breaking writer's block, just because like it comes up that I need to do a prompt for something. I again, that storyteller brain wakes up. I get excited about what I'm doing, and I realize that I am telling a story before I've had a chance to get nervous about the fact that what if I tell a bad story, or what if the story's not good, or what if I don't have ideas. So
Hmm.
it's a great way to like sneak up on your own creativity, especially when there's that kind of like anxiety or that writer's block or that vigilance about like, well, what if my ideas are bad? You start doing it instinctively, and again, once you're on a roll, even if you don't end up writing something about the prompt you pulled, that momentum is it is so hard to understate how helpful that momentum is. Um, Once the brain is awake, once you are writing, once you're in that habit, going back to another story that's not even related to the prompt you drew, or taking that prompt and writing with it and running with it and doing something with it, is a million times easier. Just a million times easier. It kind of it breaks the freeze and it gets you moving again. The other thing that I found is really helpful, like so we have had a few like novelists and writers who've used it and like written novels using the story engine deck,
Oh, that's awesome.
which is cool. So we know that like you can take an idea from premise to completion with it. C.L. Clarke's novels in the mystery, or sorry, the Magic of the Lost. I know that they used it to get unstuck in the midpoint of book two, The Faithless, which was really neat to see. I also know they've written an entire novel that was prompted using a combination of Deck of Worlds and Story Engine Deck called The Warmongers, which is not out yet. But I know there's been a deal signed for it, I believe, with Orbit, I want to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then the other thing is you can use it as kind of what C.L. Clarke did is you can use it as a story diagnostic tool where you can pull out some cards to represent where your story's at, especially if you're like stuck
Okay.
in your writing. And then you look at these elements laid out as cards and you can actually see and explore other paths for the story. So if your character has this motivation, it's connected to this place in the storyline. Great. Well, what if another character has a motivation tied to like a B character has motivation tied to the main character, and that motivation kind of interrupts that character's journey and might actually reinvigorate it because now we have like an obstacle they have to overcome, or they have a tenuous ally, but who also might betray them. So it becomes a really great tool for laying out what you already have in your story and then looking for places to expand or adjust. And as I should say, so our website is storyenginedeck.com. If you click on the blog link, there's a bunch of blogs that we do about just kind of different tips for writers and dungeon masters. We specifically have one for getting your story unstuck. So how to use the deck, or just to survey your story without the deck, and take a look at like what about it is frozen and how could I get it moving again.
Yeah, we're
And
actually featuring CL Clark on an upcoming live stream. I don't know when this podcast is airing, so maybe it would have already aired, but we are running a workshop series on our YouTube at Story Engine Deck, where on Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern for the next several weeks, we're going to be featuring a guest, and that guest will either be there to bring their TTRPG experience or their writing experience. So CL Clark is actually coming up. I know our series finale is going to feature George Straighton, who writes kind of
oh,
in like
sweet.
the Hollywood films. You know, he's a fan of the decks and he's used the decks for his writing, but he's worked on, like some of the big names, right? Transformers, Star Trek, Star
That's
Wars, and
awesome.
yeah, and he it was really interesting speaking with him because he talks about our decks as it like more better than us in some ways. He's like, oh yeah, I use this and that, and I have the playmats, and I'm like, my goodness. But like he talked a little bit about just even using it as as an exercise to train the muscle because he says writing is a muscle. It's like work,
Yeah,
it's like going to the gym. You don't just write when it's time to write your next bestseller. You have to
correct.
write all the time and using the decks to ideate. Like that's the thing is that there's no hard and fast rules. Even our guidebook, we call it a guidebook. We don't really like refer to it as a rule book because the truth is that if a prompt doesn't resonate with you, if it truly doesn't resonate with you, you can always change it and pivot it. You are not
Absolutely.
locked in. Sometimes we love challenging our writers and our creators to just sit with the prompt, even if it's not something that they would necessarily connect with immediately because it challenges them. It kind of challenges you to flex that muscle. How do you create a setting? Why is there a castle in the middle of a lake? Right? Like
Yeah.
there's some things that are disparate, but you can find a way to connect it in some ways that makes it so much more interesting when you do.
And I love the fact that you use sitting with the prompt versus being locked into it, right? Just that verbiage alone can make folks, even myself or whoever, into this, oh, now I have to, right? It's like kind of dreadful versus sitting with it of saying like, oh, wait a minute, I get to choose to sit with this and I'm going to challenge myself. So I really love that terminology where I really think like with this deck, you get to sit with these thoughts and ideas. And I love the analogy of kind of using this as a way to keep the iron sharp, right? Keep the sword sharp, and
Yeah.
to not to use that pun since we're talking about fantasy games, but very much so. Like we have to keep this, we have to keep our brain kind of continuously going, and especially as game masters and as world builders, it's really good for us to do that. So even if you're just trying to challenge yourself better, I can see where these decks do that. Now, mind you, I'm going to place for the folks out there listening in the description in the show notes, you will actually have links to the website so you can go ahead and check it out, and to social media so that way you can follow. Because honestly, folks, you really, if you want, and this is just my personal opinion, in if you want to be a better storyteller and world builder, you need to have all the tools at your disposal, right? It's just like having a computer, right? If you have a computer, you're a better world builder because you can organize your notes. And it's not saying that having pen and paper is bad, but it makes you more efficient because let's be honest, we want to spend more time playing games and building worlds than having to learn how to do the thing, right? That's why I love why you said, or what you said about a guidebook. In my opinion, a rule book, having to learn rules is limiting, but having someone to guide me on how to do something is very freeing. So again, I still appreciate that. And like I said, folks, like I'm going to place everything in the show notes and every link possible because I really think this tool, I really believe in my heart that this is going to make folks into better, more effective storytellers. And the world building process is going to just be even smoother because you'll never run out of ideas. And if you run out of 30 billion ideas, then you're a phenom is all I can say.
Then buy one of our expansions and add another few billion back into the to the
That's
mix.
right. Just a few billion, right? Just that's
Yeah.
nothing. Nothing.
Yeah, and if folks are interested in purchasing our decks, we do have a discount code for your listeners. It is
Oh,
Bearded Nerd 10. I'm not sure if it needs to be in all caps or not, but maybe put it in all caps just in case, but it's Bearded Nerd 10 for 10% off your first order. As, you know, a thank you for listening to us share with you our
Yeah.
story and everything that we do.
well, and we really appreciate it because we are a lot of the audience here, like I said, we're game masters, but we're really world builders. Like on Discord, we have this fun channel where it's called the think tank. Think about like, okay, like what's really important about a side quest. It's actually on the day of recording, which is February 12th. We were talking about what's so important about a side quest. So we just started having dialogue, and it was really awesome to see that. We've talked about so many different things that in reality, and something that I have faced, and I'll be completely transparent, I've had some of that writer's block. Especially I have two kids, right? It's hard to kind of sit down and think and just kind of have that time to myself without feeling guilty as a parent. And yeah, I could take 10, 15 minutes every day to write. But then it goes back to, well, what am I writing about? I need something. I need to be fed something so that I can kind of taste the morsel of said creativity, whatever that platter of creativity, the plate, so to speak. So it's really nice to have something like this as a tool to do so. But with that being said, I want to be cognizant of time. My final question to you all is, what are some of the future plans, if you can reveal it? I obviously understand if you can, but what are some of the future plans for the Story Engine deck?
This is where I look
Ah.
to Miroki for how much permission I have to share things.
We have so many jokes that like Peter is just always bubbling with new things and wanting to share them. And I have the little shepherd's hook
Yep,
saying
yep.
like, don't promise too much, Peter. We're only three people. So, the story engine is run by three people only, myself, Peter, and Eric, who does a lot of all our community and all our socials. If you're kind of sending a message most of the time. It is Eric answering. And there's a lot to do when you run a small business. So I'm always like, the more ideas we promise, the more we have to hook you back a
Yep.
little bit. Um, all that is to say, we do have we're all, we're creators and dreamers. We have a lot of ideas in the behind the scenes right now. So if you stay connected with us on our social media or on our newsletter, you'll be the first to know. I promise. I promise the second we're allowed to share those ideas, you will see them. Or you can join us on our live streams and ask any questions that you have. I know, some time ago we put out a survey to our community and had over 600 responses. It was so incredible of
That's
folks who are
awesome.
just sharing what they're looking for next from us. Some of the things we threw out there were like, and it's things that we try and listen to people for, right? Like whether it's creating an app or whether it is creating another expansion or whether it is a new writing tool. We've gotten a lot of good responses and we do listen to our community. In fact, our last crowdfunding campaign, we ended up creating these monstrous storage boxes for all three of our deck systems
I
called the
saw. Yeah, they
Leviathan
were cool.
boxes. And those Leviathan boxes were from direct feedback from our community when we launched the crowdfunding campaign, listening to what they wanted and designing something literally mid-campaign to meet that need. So, always interested in hearing what people are looking for. We have lots of things coming up, and you just have to stay tuned to find out.
Well, I'm really excited. And no joke, that is a Leviathan box. Like it is, it is ginormous. Like that. I don't even I just picture and honey, if you're listening to this, just remember I love you. If I brought
And
that
you
home
budget.
and I budget, that there's two things right there. So, um, I would most likely, I know exactly where it would go in my house too. So I'm just saying, if a dad of two kids that lives in a townhouse can put it in their house, you can too. No, I'm kidding. I'm not trying to twist anyone's arm, but I really appreciate y'all in all seriousness coming on to the show and really just talking about it. I can't wait for us to kind of chat more. And really, I can't wait to show some of the worlds that our community builds. Because for the folks out there listening, those especially that are on Discord, we are going to do a couple of world building nights where we're just going to take the deck and build awesome worlds. So for those, and it's going to be periodically, even after, we're this is something that we want to do with our community since we are world builders. And not going to lie, we're going to use this deck and we're going to use this tool. But again, I thank y'all so much for joining us today. I really do appreciate it. And folks, thank you so much for listening. Like I said, all social media links will be in the show notes and in the description. Links to the website will be there as well. But we appreciate y'all coming together for this podcast. Remember, folks, if you did enjoy this podcast, be sure to leave a comment and let us know what was your favorite part about the podcast or have any questions that I can direct towards them. But more importantly, folks, remember to be kind and compassionate to one another. The world's a bit crazy, but a little bit of kindness and compassion truly go a long way. And above everything else, keep gaming, y'all.